and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, very, very much appreciated. Certainly seems like there's a lot of love out there for the Ardnamurchan distillery, which is nice. So finally got a reply to my email from Graham. Better late than never, I suppose. I think he'd been out on the road, and yeah, he said that a sample of the Midgie would be winging its way out fairly shortly, but obviously that's just going to have to wait for another episode, I guess. I don't know when that will be. And talking of, I don't know when that will ever be. That's kind of the theme for today's kind of episode of the show. A couple of years ago, Andrew Ferguson, the sales director at Speyside Distillery, kindly sent me a number of samples, and it was certainly my intention to use them. But you know how these things happen. You know, samples got stuck in a box and they got sort of forgotten about and what have you, and then time elapses and other things kind of happen, and anyway, a few weeks ago he kindly sent me 3 new samples of new releases, and I thought, do you know what, it's probably about time I did another episode on the Speyside Distillery. I mean, I have done a couple of episodes in the past, but I just thought, you know, as you well know, this is going to be the last episode of the show for probably a week, maybe 2 weeks, I don't know, as you well know, I'm going to be up to my eyeballs in paint redecorating this place, and obviously then I've got the sort of the new bookcases being fitted and all that. Incidentally, I got an email from a friend Simon that's building these bookcases, and said he'd sprained his wrists and had been off work for a while. I mean, I didn't inquire as to how the wrists got sprained, but you know, they did. So timing is a bit kind of up in the air, shall we say. But like I said, hopefully I may well end up having to sort of do episodes from the kitchen again for a short period of time until things are back to normal. But anyway, we'll stick with it and see what happens. But anyway, today's episode of the show, yeah, so Speyside Distillery, it's kind of a distillery, I suppose, that kind of flies under the radar a little bit. It's another one of those distilleries that kind of like had a bit of a delayed start, shall we say. It was originally planned, or should we say the plans were commissioned back in 1962, apparently. It's a bit like kind of Ben Romack, you know. There was just an ordinate sort of wait between, you know, the plans being commissioned and the distillery actually being built. I mean, the distillery itself wasn't actually built for another 20 odd years. In 1987 the distillery was finally actually built. I mean, obviously in the intervening time we'd had the Whisky crash and all this kind of stuff, so, you know, late 80s was probably not the best time to actually build a distillery, but indeed the distillery was finally completed. But then it wasn't another 3 years until spirit actually started flowing off the stills. I mean, nowadays, you know, if you're not got your distillery up and running within a year, you know, I imagine the creditors and investors are basically going, hang on, we want a bloody return on our investment, you know. So, you know, things are a lot different to what they were then. And I suppose back in well, I mean, the distillery itself is quite a pretty little distillery, it actually has to be said. I think it's a nice pretty brick-built distillery. The stills they used were actually ex-Lockside stills, apparently, but they didn't fit. So somebody basically cut a foot off the top of each still to shoehorn them into the distillery. So wonderful invention. I mean, wonderful. I mean, apparently production didn't actually, well, I said production started in 1990, actually kicked off on Christmas Day of 1990. I mean, can you imagine that? Poor buggers, you know, they sort of like want to sit down to their Christmas dinner and no, you've got to turn the bloody stills on, you know, it's kind of like, anyway. The funny thing about the distillery, another funny thing, well, not necessarily so funny, is that, like I said, it does fly under the radar a bit. I mean, most people's idea of Speyside was that it was very much a sherry cask using distillery, sort of a la Macallan and so on and so forth. And to be fair, certainly from the independent bottlings I've seen, I would guess the first 10 years of production are very, very much in that mould. Certainly a lot of the stuff that was coming out or being sort of bottled from that sort of early 10-year period was pretty much all sherry casks. Doesn't seem to come in about 99, 2000 that you start actually seeing some American oak casks being used, and it's pretty cool. I mean, nowadays actually it's pretty much the reverse of that. I mean, there's 1 or 2 sherry bottlings in the range, but pretty much most of the distillery bottlings anyway are ex-American oak. And again, sort of you kind of have this sort of feeling with sort of distilleries that use a lot of sherry casks that their spirit is fairly quick fermentation. And sort of, should we say, a touch on the rough side, which is why it's often, whacked into sherry casks. And I'm not saying Speyside makes a rough spirit, but we'll find out what the spirit is. But it's not exactly a long estery fermentation. I mean, it's it's about 90 hours. I mean, which is moderate, I guess. I mean, if you're wanting that lovely sort of estery, fruity sort of wort to sort of get that kind of style, you're looking at 120 plus basically as your fermentation time. So it's not too short, but it's not that long, so we're in a sort of a pseudo kind of traditional style of spirit, which theoretically should work with sherry and should work with American oak. It's not like it's a sort of 40-60 hour fermentation, which really but anyway, we will obviously get to that point in due course. So I've got a fair few cask strength samples in front of me. I'm not going to go into a huge amount more information about the distillery. You can obviously find that out from their website. As you can notice, got nice generous sized samples from the distillery, which was really cool, and that's always appreciated. So I'm not having to sort of pour little bits in my glass to do a tasting to make sure I keep some. Nice amount left. So yeah, big thank you to Andrew and all the guys at the distillery for the sample. So without much further ado, let's have a look at today's lunch. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the Trutina. This is the cask strength Trutina. This is batch number 4, bottled at 59.4%. So the range is essentially Trutina and Fumare, so unpeated spirit, and Fumare obviously lightly peated spirit. The Trutina, both of them have a 46% bottling and a cask strength bottling. There are other odds and sods in the range, but essentially that's what you're getting. So this is Trutina batch number 4. Now then we're going to move on to one of the new releases. This is the Spirit of Speyside Whisky Festival 2024 bottling. It's a 15-year-old single cask that was distilled in 2008 and bottled at 46%. The next bottling we'll be looking at again is a limited edition 18-year-old. This is made from peated malt. It's bottled at 46%, and so I think a single cask, if memory serves me correct. I hadn't actually written down whether it was a single cask or not, but I have a feeling it was. There's only a very few bottles available. And we're going to move on to the sort of third bottling in their kind of core range, if you like. Excuse me. This is called the Tenne, and again they do a 46% bottling and a cask strength bottling. This is batch number 2, bottled at 58.3%, and it is finished in ex-tawny port casks. So lovely colour, and it doesn't look like it's sort of like a wash with tawny port, which is quite nice. So looking forward to that one. And then we're moving on to the third of the new bottlings that the Speyside Distillery have released. This is called Trilogia. It's a limited edition vatting or fusion, I suppose. It's basically they've taken casks of Fumare, Trutina and Tenne, vatted them all together, and then finished them in first fill tawny port casks. So again, the colour is actually quite light. I mean, for a sort of finishing in a first fill tawny port cask, I would expect something a little bit darker than that. So I think that's going to be another interesting one. And the final bottling of the day is a little bit more peat. This is the Fumare cask strength, batch number 3, bottled at 57.5%. So yeah, I think this is going to be a bit of fun. So let's kick off with the Trutina. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Trutina. Let's see what the nose groups on this then, shall we? It's a little tight. Straw-like barley, as I would kind of expect. So, but there's some lovely fruit. There's some apricot. There's some lemon. The oak is fairly subtle, obviously, or I would assume predominantly refill American oak, but there's a nice amount of vanilla there. It's quite aromatic, it's fresh, it's a lovely whiskey at the end of the day. It's kind of classically, it's not, well, classically Speyside, sort of, I suppose. It's kind of, it's not the sort of, I would put it in the slightly more robust Speyside camp. There's a little bit of green fruit there, but you know, not too much. Unlike some bottlings where they're kind of like so awash with that astringent green fruit, it's kind of almost too much. This has got a little element of that, but certainly it's more barley accented, lovely sweetness to the fruit, and a touch of oak. Yeah, pleasant. Let's see what passes on. Pretty much like the nose, although it does kick off with a little bit more oak, but you've got that white fruit, apricot, straw, barley, a little bit more spice than was on the nose. That's certainly the sort of the alcohol is emphasising that. It's a little masked, it's a little mouth-watering on the finish, but again, it's a lovely whiskey. Let's put a little drop of water and see what that does to it. Certainly brought out the citric notes. I'm getting lemon, lime, a little bit more floral honey, a little bit more floral white fruit, pear drops possibly. And again, sort of like, although there wasn't a great deal of oak to start with on the nose, there's even less now, but it does allow the character of the spirit to sort of come through. It's probably not much older than about 8 to 10 maybe. It's got that lovely freshness, but it's not too youthful. It's got some nice weight to it. Yeah, that's a lovely spirit at the end of the day. Let's see what passes on now. Kind of brought out the oiliness of the spirit, which is another thing. It does tend to happen. The sort of the higher alcohol kind of like sort of keeps the oiliness relatively in check, and then you sort of drop the ABV and that brings it out. So it's maybe less overtly fruity. I think I personally prefer it without water. Yeah, I mean it's not. I mean, it's a lovely apricotty aftertaste. Actually, it's length. It's another one of these kind of if or you know kind of thing. Do you prefer it maybe a little bit shorter, but a little more spicy, a little bit more intense? Do you want to put a little drop of water with it, lose a little bit of the complexity, lengthen it, maybe increase the aftertaste possibly? It's kind of like a sort of. Like I said, neither is right or wrong. It's just a case of how you would prefer that whiskey. And like I said, personally, neat for me, but I think it's not too bad with water either. Okay, so moving on to the spirit of the Speyside 15-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's a lovely nose. Dense, aromatic, again. Very much barley accented, honey, oak, but not overly oak. The oak is noticeable. It sits in the background. There's a little waft of peat. I would imagine that either this is a vatting of the peated and unpeated, or this is, because it is starting to come through a little bit stronger. There's some white fruits, marzipan, lime. It's a lovely middle-aged Speyside at the end of the day, and it is wonderfully juicy. It's a lovely whisky. So the pass on. That is just wonderfully juicy, soft, smooth. Apricot, apple, bit of citrus, bit of peat smoke. I mean, this is how you do peat as a Speyside whisky. You just want a subtle note of peat just wafting through. You don't. I know that everybody loves peat, and so many of these Speyside distilleries have just become obsessed with whacking up the parts per million, and the reality is that you then end up with this kind of almost pseudo Islay type of whisky, because it just becomes all about the peat, and that's pretty much about it. This is just beautifully balanced. Lots of Speyside character, lots of fruit, lots of weight, oiliness, honey, and just a waft of peat, a little gentle peat element. It's just adding to that beautiful complexity. And sometimes, as they say, less is definitely more. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 18-year-old. Let's see what those gives us on this. Denser, it's definitely showing more maturity, more oak again, oxidised fruit, grilled nuts, honey, barley. I mean, this is just, it just shows you the course of the spirit, how the Speyside spirit evolves and develops given some time. It's starting to develop that old, almost kind of tropical fruit note that you sometimes pick up on quite old whiskies. Little bit of peat smoke, again, very subtle. Background, just adding that little bit of complexity. I mean, if you love your Speyside whiskies, this is a beautiful nose. Now, it's not cheap. I forget. No, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to go into the price. That kind of spoils everything at the end of the day. Just basically sort of wallow. Well, I shall wallow in the fact that this is probably way out of my price bracket, but by God, it's gorgeous. Let's see what the power's like. A little lighter on its feet, in actual fact, not quite so dense, not quite so oily, a little bit more citrus, lime, lemon. Again, we're in that subtle subtropical fruit, a little bit of kiwi, apricot, barley, straw, lemon again. The length is divine, and the peat is just, again, just wafting through. A little bit of earthiness, a little bit of not quite charcoal, but sort of peaty, charcoaly kind of note right on the finish. I mean, that's gorgeous. That's long, beautiful, delicate, but it's got some weight as well. It's not a feat. It's got a bit of weight going on there, a bit of oiliness. But that is just very, very impressive. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Tenne. This is 58.3% tawny port finish. Let's see what those goes on this then, shall we? Oh, that's a bit tight. The tawny port is noticeable, obviously. Getting that kind of slightly high-toned sort of red-black fruits. Just a touch of bran flakes, herbal fruit. It's a bit heavy on the port, it has to be said. A I'm not getting a great deal of distillery character. I'm hoping that when I put a little drop of water with it, that may well just bring the balance back in check again. I mean, it's a lovely nose. It's very clean, it has to be said. There's no blemishes, no off notes. There's a little bit of charred wood. I get the impression of kind of, that's only because I've got to this point, knowing what I'm looking for with regards to the spirit character. I could get a slight impression of that behind all of the tawny port fruit and wood. Sure, outside. Well, you can tell that's 58 point something odd percent. I mean, ooh, that's got a kick of alcohol on the finish. That's really masked, really intense. Again, we're very much portwood orientated, tawny fruits, lots of spice, black fruit. Again, it's got that kind of bran flaky kind of note, spice. I mean, it's just almost, the finish almost kind of stops. And you get this real intensity of sort of alcohol and spice basically on the finish. It's kind of a little bit heavy-handed on the port, it has to be said, but it is what it is. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see if that does take the edge off the port. It does. But it's not really brought out the distillery character. There's a bit more straw notes, but it's kind of like that. Yes, there is that straw-like quality to the character of the spirit, but also it's kind of sort of porty straw as well. A little bit more pepper. It's softer. It's maybe not quite so intense. It's my least favoured, but again, it's really quite clean and. Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty intense, it has to be said. Let's see what the balance on it. Okay, so the balance is slightly better on the palate. I mean, it's still quite porty, but I mean, I suppose that's what you're paying for, I suppose. You know, you don't want a portwood finished whiskey that really has no port character, you know. It's kind of, but it's all about nuance at the end of the day. I mean, this is wonderfully clean. It's got some straw-like barley notes, plenty of spice, bit of pepper, and then the kind of like the fruit kind of comes back again. I think like I said, the balance is slightly better with a little drop of water, but it's still pretty heavy on the cask at the end of the day. Okay, so let's move on to the Trilogia. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Ah, no, that's better. Now, even though this has been kind of like, you know, blended and then re-racked into first fill tawny port, the port character is really, really subtle. Now, incidentally, if you're coming along to the whiskey tasting on Wednesday, you will get the opportunity to taste this, because I've put this into the tasting lineup. I love this. I think it's a lovely whiskey, beautifully balanced. It's got the white fruits. It's got the slightly sort of almost estery white fruits, vanilla. There's a little bit of peat smoke. There's some porty fruit. The balance is just absolutely divine. This is really what the Tenne should be, in my personal opinion. There's a little bit of peat smoke. There's a little bit of almost astringent peat, aromatic, juicy, fruity. That is lovely. I mean, I love that. I mean, I tasted this. I remember tasting it and thinking, yeah, that's damn good, and it really is. Anyway, let's sort of pass on. quite light in body. Again, kind of kicks off with the Trutina-y character, the sort of white fruits, the sort of apricot, a little bit of spice. The sort of port starts to sort of creep in on the mid palate, a little bit of red fruit, black fruit, oxidized fruit, juicy. Oh, it's wonderfully juicy. A wisp, delicate wisp of smoke. You know, it's like, you know, you could almost overlook it, but it just there on the edge, and the complexity is absolutely gorgeous. It's really mouth-filling, it's long, the sort of everything is really harmonious. And like I said, even though this has been re-racked into sort of, you know, first fill tawny port casks, the balance is absolutely spot on. And that is what it is all about. Right, okay, so let's move on to the final whisky of the afternoon. So this is the cask strength Fumare. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, Charles. There's a fair old whack of peat there. I mean, I would guess, what, mid-20s, maybe up, maybe edging 30 parts per million, I would guess. But again, it's not OTT. I mean, yes, the peat is probably the most noticeable part of the nose, and it's got that herbal character, but there's some lovely fruit beneath that. There's that, well, I say classic in inverted commas, Speyside character, Speyside Distillery character rather than Speyside character. So almond, apricot, pear, white peach, a little bit of pepper, a little bit of wood spice, and barley. I mean, you know, again, this is a little bit peachier than I possibly would have gone for with regards to a peated spey, but we're not in sort of peat monster territory here. We are balanced again. We are a peated spey, and this is what I would want from a peated spey at the end of the day. I want some fruit and Speyside character with an augmentation of peat. Now the augmentation is a little bit heavy, but it's not out of balance. It's not out of kilter, shall we say. I like that. Let's see what parts on. Oily, rich, dense. Again, plenty of that sort of apricot, white fruits, a little bit of spice. Delicate amount of peat. Almost my windpipe there. Quite earthy, quite dry. The alcohol is drying out the finish. It's masked, but spicy. Yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, that's how to do a peated spey, in my opinion. Don't overdo the peat. Keep the character of your spirit and just augment it with a little bit of peat. It's not rocket science at the end of the day, but like I say, the trouble is that so many people love big peat monsters that these distilleries now just think, well, we just got to chuck loads of peat at our spirit because that's what people want. But for me, you know, call me a purist, I suppose. I don't, you know, if I want huge gobs of peat, I'll buy an Optum, or I'll buy a Port Charlotte or Ardbeg or something. If I want balanced peat, then this is what I go for. I go for a Fumare. It's kind of like, you know, anyway, let's see what a little drop of water does to the nose. Okay, it's not made a huge amount of difference which is good, because it's kind of good to start off with. The peat is a little lighter. It's a little bit more spirit character, slightly bubblegummy, possibly white fruits, a little bit more citrus. I mean, again, it's just really nicely balanced. So we'll pass on. Again, just really well balanced palate. The peat is lessened a little bit. It's possibly a little astringent on the finish. The peat is still quite noticeable. the sort of tannins and the alcohol are still drying the finish a little bit, but it's still got plenty of straw like barley, white fruits, that kind of thing. It's still, like I said, a balanced peated Speys. So at the end of the day, that's really good way to finish. Okay, so that's on today's episode of the show. Again, a big thank you to Andrew from Speyside Distillery for the samples for today's episode of the show. As I keep saying all the time, if it wasn't for the generosity of you guys, not just the distilleries, but you guys that watch the show and want things, want my opinion on things, that's really cool. It's what makes this episode of the show, and we have this symbiosis, I think is the word. Anyway, so that the Spey Trutina, it's just a beautiful spirit at the end of the day. It's kind of like I said, you have to sort of like forget Speyside and big sherry and all that kind of thing, because it's not quite of where that distillery is at the moment. It's showcasing that it's got a lovely spirit. It's not hard, it's not industrial, doesn't need to be swamped by sherry. It actually has a lovely balanced character, and I think the Trutina shows that in spades. The spirit of Speyside whiskey, I mean, that was just lovely. I mean, it was just, here we had going through into the 18, the sort of the progression. We could see how age affected the character of the liquid, what happened to it. The 15 had this lovely freshness, a lovely citric note, again a light whiff of peat. Moving on to the 18, it had this more oxidative character, a bit more weighty, but again we had the sort of like, you could see the DNA of the distillery character here in the 18, and at the end of the day, that's really all you could ask for. The Tenne, okay, it's kind of, there is a batch variation going on. I have tasted other batches, and there is a bit of a batch variation going on here with the Tenne. Some batches are, or one or two of the other batches are slightly less intense on the port. Batch 2 just was pretty much, a heavier port, and this is always the way with finishing, and batch variation. But at the end of the day, I thought it was a lovely whiskey. The Trilogia was just absolutely spot on. I mean, if the Tenne was that good, I would be going nuts over it. But the Trilogia is just absolutely gorgeous. It's balanced at the end of the day. It has all the elements that you would want without being sort of overwhelmed by either peat or the port character. And again, I suppose there's a Fumare the same way. Not overly peated. The peat is a little bit more obvious, a little bit more prevalent. But again, you've still got the distillery character coming through there. The straw like barley, the apricots, the sort of the fruit. It's not a one-dimensional, overtly peat monster. And this is it. Like I said, I keep saying that, with peated Speyside whiskies, keep the DNA of your character and just augment it with a bit of smoke, rather than just flatten it completely with overt quantities of peat. So really, really balanced. I love the bottles as well. The bottles are lovely, sort of tall and thin, but my God, they're a pain in the ass because they don't fit on the shelves. I have to basically, you have to put them on the shelf. Out of sync, that's the thing. I like my Speysides in sync, but it's out of sync because I can't put them on the shelf, so I have to put them next to it. But anyway, yeah, that's just the way it goes. Lovely, elegant bottlings, which seems a lot of people kind of love, it has to be said. But the spirit itself is absolutely gorgeous. So if you've not tasted a whiskey from the Speyside Distillery, I would suggest you definitely start with the Trutina, get all of the distillery character, which is absolutely gorgeous, and then work your way through them. That's, or better still, just buy the 18-year-old because that's stunningly good. Anyway, like I said at the beginning of the show, obviously there's going to be a bit of disruption to the show for the next few weeks. I'm not entirely sure exactly what's going to be happening, but when I'm back here, hopefully it will be a new and improved backdrop, shall we say. But anyway, until then, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.
You